University on a collapsing superintelligent AI, so that'll be an interesting discussion. So I'll give another 20 minutes and then 10 minutes of discussions after.
Perfect. Thank you all. It's a pleasure to be here. And I think my talk is a little kind of more big picture than Kyle's. I'm not getting into the details. I think it's complementary to Kyle's. It may not seem that way on the surface, but we can talk about how. So my talk is on collapsing superintelligent AI. So the issue here is, as is going to come as no surprise to most of you, philosophers, computer scientists, lots of other people have been getting increasingly worried about the dangers posed by superintelligent AI. And lots of people are talking about it. Elon Musk, for better or worse, is the most famous example right now. He said that with AI, we're summoning the demon and that it's our greatest existential threat. So why is it such a problem, potentially? Once we achieve human-level superintelligent AI, lots of people think that we're going to have some kind of quote-unquote intelligence explosion very quickly. In other words, this human-level AI, which works a lot faster than human beings, is going to improve upon itself, create new versions in one way or another, and there are different ways that that might occur. But this human-level AI will improve upon itself and create something which is super intelligent. In other words, and this is going to wind up being important for the talk, a super intelligent AI is an AI that basically equals or exceeds human cognitive abilities in every relevant domain of human cognition. Not just a narrow range, not even a moderate range, but basically the entire range of human abilities. And many people believe there's a good chance that superintelligent AI will wind up destroying humanity, which again is not going to come as a surprise to people here, I think. So one of the things, I want to set up some background before going into the main argument that I want to discuss today. So my purpose today is not to defend a particular conclusion very strongly, but to throw some arguments and some ideas out there for consideration that I think people are just not talking a whole lot about, at least that I'm seeing very much. And they really, I think, need to get to the bottom of some of these issues, at least in the long term. So I'm going to assume that a superintelligent AI is going to have an ultimate goal or set of goals. These could be spelled out as something like an analog of desire. They are going to desire various specific things. If we or whoever or whatever designs the AI tries to specify those goals directly, will likely fail. And this is going to be, again, a familiar problem from the literature. Nick Bostrom has the famous paperclip factory example. So Nick Bostrom says, imagine we give a superintelligent AI a very seemingly innocuous goal, like make as many paperclips as possible. Well, the AI is likely, if it has enough power and enough computational resources that it will use to amass power, that seemingly innocuous goal could go very, very wrong. The AI could decide, human beings have trace supplies of the sorts of elements that are useful for making paperclips and harvest human beings for the making of paperclips. Or maybe human beings get in the way of transporting materials to the paperclip factory, so the superintelligent AI eliminates human beings. It could even go terribly in different ways. Imagine we directly give the AI the goal, make human beings as happy as possible. That's great. The AI might decide the most effective way to do that is capture all the human beings, put them in cages, and then pump happiness-producing drugs into them 24/7. So this issue is related to very familiar problems to analytic philosophers about the difficulties of conceptual analysis, getting definitions of interesting concepts exactly right. There's always, basically it's kind of a truism among analytic philosophers that there's never been an interesting everyday concept that's been successfully analyzed completely. There's always, anytime someone produces a definition, some kind of little counterexample. So it's an illustration of the same basic principle. Getting these goals right is a very, very difficult thing when you try to specify them directly. Okay, so an alternative is to specify the goals indirectly. So to try to get the AI to adopt the goals that you want the AI to adopt, but to do that in a way that doesn't directly build the goals in. Okay, and there are two roughly speaking ways to do this, very general ways to do this. What I'm going to call indirect moral approaches and indirect psychological approaches. So these rely on the SAI, the psi, to discover truths about morality. Or excuse me, this is the indirect moral approaches specifically. This relies on the psi to basically figure out the truth about morality and then build its goals out of that truth. So you give the AI the general instruction, figure out moral philosophy. And then based on that, it adopts the goal, whatever goal it decides is the goal it should have based on its investigation into moral philosophy. Okay, I'm not going to be focusing too much on these approaches for a few reasons. We don't know where these approaches are going necessarily. And that could be very, very dangerous for human interests. If you have a psi that decides, human beings are, an inferior sort of cognitive being and should be eliminated, this could be very, very bad for the future of humanity. Now, we might be being selfish in being concerned about human interests if the truths about morality say we shouldn't worry about that. But it's nevertheless a dangerous path to be going down, not something that should be taken lightly. And then there's a bigger issue, too, that I see mentioned occasionally but is not talked that much about, which is that these AIs may not turn out to be conscious. I mean, that's a big issue that I know will be talked about a lot at this conference. If they turn out not to be conscious, then they might perform a facsimile of moral reasoning and wind up eliminating the only conscious bearers of value in the universe. Because they might decide, more cognitively sophisticated things are more important. It doesn't actually have anything going on at home, but it sort of creates the facsimile of reasoning as though it were some sort of very sophisticated cognitive thing. So that's another issue with these indirect moral approaches. So I'm going to focus on the indirect psychological approaches instead. So these rely on the psi to discover what humans do desire or would desire under certain idealized circumstances. And then they adopt whatever the ultimate conclusion of their psychological investigation is as a result. So they figure out what humans would want or do want, and then they adopt that as their goal. Okay, so my aim here is to sort of look carefully at how a psi that was designed this way would behave. And I'll argue that there are considerations that may create underappreciated complexities for these kinds of indirect psychological approaches. There might be paralysis or total unpredictability in psi action given the results of their moral reasoning. But the thing I want to focus even more on is the second option B, that they might wind up cannibalizing their own cognitive abilities as a result of the processes that they undergo. In other words, and I'll get into this in more detail as we go, but a kind of rough summary is they might decide based on the goals that they adopt that the cognitive abilities that they have, including some of the ones that specifically make them superintelligences, will not be efficient, not be useful to them, and they'll take steps to eliminate them in themselves and any successors that they build. So that's kind of the main thing that I want to talk about. And I'll say this again, I mentioned this at the beginning. I don't fully endorse this argument, but I think it is worthy of consideration, and I think it's something that should be a higher priority, at least, in getting to the bottom of than what sort of big picture philosophical research in AI safety has done so far. So I've spoken about some of these issues elsewhere, and I'm going to draw on some of that material. So those of you who have heard me speak before, there may be some similarities to previous talks. I've also mentioned another issue in previous work that's also relevant here that I'm going to stay away from today, but that is the issue of skepticism with AIs. As an AI becomes super intelligent, if it gets trapped in various skeptical worries, that might paralyze it from acting or create some kind of unpredictability in its action as well. And I think that may also be an underappreciated possibility. That is in many ways complementary to the things I'm going to say today, but I'm going to, for sake of kind of concentrating the discussion, I'm going to avoid getting into those issues, but if people have questions, we can talk about them in the Q&A. Okay, here's the basic argument that I'm giving, and I've laid it out step by step, so if you have the handout, that may be an easier place to follow it. But I'll kind of sketch out what the argument is here. So a psi would, by definition, equal or exceed the cognitive abilities of pretty much all human beings in all domains where human beings engage in some kind of cognitive exercise. That's basically part of the definition of a psi. And in fact, under normal circumstances, the psi would exceed human abilities. The only places where it wouldn't exceed human abilities are the places where humans are already topping out the scales, essentially, or nearly topping out the scales. Okay, one of the domains of interest is theoretical moral reasoning, answering questions in meta-ethics, in normative ethics, questions about are there facts about morality? If so, what in general are the patterns in those facts, etc. This is just a domain that human beings engage in all the time. Human philosophers talk endlessly about these sorts of questions. So it's clearly a relevant cognitive domain. So if those premises are true, the psi would exceed human abilities in those particular domains surrounding moral reasoning, or at the very least equal those domains, or equal human abilities in those domains. So many philosophers, though, do form new beliefs about meta-ethics and normative ethics based on their theoretical moral reasoning. This is a standard thing that anyone with familiarity in philosophy is going to tell you, oh yeah, I've changed my mind about this issue, or my friend has changed their mind about this particular issue. Very standard sort of thing. So if the psi would equal or exceed human abilities in these respects, and many philosophers change their minds about these things as they go, as they learn, as they think, presumably the psi is going to do the same thing. And that's just what the combination of 4, 5, and 6 here are saying, is that the psi will also be changing its mind. Sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. It's actually 5. Is it 5? Hold on. Sorry, no, it's coming up here. So the psi would also have this ability to form the new beliefs as a result of having this ability on analogy with human reasoners and human philosophers. Okay, but now here comes a crucial assumption, and this is a very common assumption in this literature, that psis, just like allegedly human beings, would not have the ability to alter their final goals as a result of their reasoning about morality. This is what is typically in the literature called the orthogonality thesis. That's the name that Nick Bostrom gave to it a while back. The idea that reasoning cannot affect ultimate goals. All reasoning can do, if it affects anything at all about action, is affecting the instrumental paths by which a person, or in this case a psi, achieves its final goals. But the final goals are given by its design features. Okay, so if that's true, though, and this, again, here's a crucial claim made in the argument, the psi would cannibalize its own moral reasoning due to that reasoning's being inefficient. So if the psi is not going to be able to achieve goals based on this moral reasoning that it undergoes, then at some point the psi may think, the psi may have some kind of processing center to deal with issues like this. The psi will think to itself, well, what am I thinking about all this stuff for? It's not helping me to achieve my final goals. My final goals are the raison d'etre of my existence, right? These are why I'm here. This is what my life is dedicated to. Why am I thinking about all this stuff that's not helping me to achieve my final goals? Okay, so if the psi would cannibalize its moral reasoning in this way, it would turn itself into a non-psi. Okay, it would turn itself into something that didn't have abilities that a number of regular human beings have, namely the human beings that think about philosophy. It would actually turn itself into kind of a philosophically ignorant sort of agent, which is not a psi. That's at best what I've called and other people have called savant AIs with highly specialized abilities, but not having the general range of capacities. Okay, so there are a bunch of potential objections. In the interest of time, I'm not going to try to get to all of these, but I've sort of listed some objections in case people want to talk about them in the Q&A. The ones that I'm going to focus on are the objections to premises 8 and 9. I think these are the most pressing and interesting objections, but as I said, we can deal with other ones in the Q&A if people are interested in that. So first, the objection surrounding premise 8, which is the orthogonality thesis. Okay, so the orthogonality thesis basically states reasoning can't impact final goals, as I mentioned. This is very closely related to Humeanism about moral motivation, those of you who are philosophers and work on issues about moral psychology and metaethics. So this thesis is embraced by people like Bostrom, tentatively by David Chalmers, and it's generally considered the orthodox position in these debates, but for reasons that I'm not entirely certain of. The arguments in the literature in favor of the orthogonality thesis are sparse at best. In many cases, there's no argument at all. It's just kind of assumed. People will claim it's intuitive, but not really give much of any argument at all. So I think that's a potential weak point of the overall argument that I've given here for the psi collapse. Right? If premise 8 falls apart, if the orthogonality thesis is false, then the psi could very easily adopt all sorts of fundamental goals based on its moral reasoning. But I think it's important to see where this is going. If that's the case, a psi will be, in principle, highly unpredictable. And not just unpredictable because of unpredictability in the way that its instrumental reasoning works. Not just in the way that a chess-playing computer is unpredictable in its chess play, because it's a creative instrumental reasoner. This would be a deeper kind of unpredictability based on not even being able to figure out what the fundamental goals, what the ultimate goals of the AI would be. Okay, so that's basically what I was saying here. The unlikely best case scenario is that none of the psi beliefs that it forms as a result of moral reasoning conflict with its pre-given final goals. But that's kind of unlikely, it seems like, given the vast domain of moral possibilities. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about that premise 9. So this premise is again saying that moral reasoning, basically, those abilities could be quarantined, that those abilities could be diminished without somehow affecting the ability of the psi to achieve its pre-given goals. This seems intuitive to me. It at least seems like it's worth taking seriously because it doesn't, I see no immediate reason to suppose that the psi's ability to reason about morality is somehow deeply connected to other abilities it has, so that it could continue to achieve the other goals it has and exercise those other abilities without eliminating the moral reasoning abilities. For instance, it could understand human psychology very, very well without actually engaging in moral reasoning itself. Okay, how am I doing on time? Okay. Yeah. Almost, yeah. I have just another. So I list here some, basically what I just said, some concerns about whether the quarantining of these abilities is a feasible thing. But again, we can talk more about this in the Q&A, but I have no particular reason to think these abilities can't be quarantined. I just want to say this basically as a last point. So I've stated this argument as being about a psi turning itself into a non-psi. But another way to think of the basic pattern of reasoning here is that what we're looking at is a kind of pressure for an AI, which is not yet a psi, to never become a psi in the first place. That there be these internal incentives, essentially, to prevent the development of certain kinds of abilities which are not efficient from the point of view of achieving the AI's goals in the first place. So that's another way to think of the reasoning here, is as putting kind of downward pressure on an AI to never develop certain kinds of abilities in the first place. Okay, and then last slide. Don't rest easy, because there are plenty of ways things can go wrong, even if this argument is sound. For instance, something a lot less than a psi could wind up destroying us. So Kyle, I mean, you sort of talked about a bunch of ways that something which is less than a psi, in my sense, could destroy us. Anyway, and also there are highly speculative elements of any argument like this. So I don't want to encourage people to rest on their laurels, but even so.
Okay, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
thank you.
Thank you. This is great, Joseph. All right, I'd like to open it up for questions now. Yes.
Hello?
Yeah, it's good.
So, recently I attended a talk by Peter Bolton at the University of Michigan, and he talked about trying to teach AI moral values and ethics. So I was just wondering, you talked about indirect moral approaches where we let the AI, it sounds like, read every piece of moral philosophy literature that's ever been produced, and it comes up with its own. Do you think it would be possible to teach an artificial superintelligence moral philosophy either after it's become superintelligent or before it's become superintelligent, or do we have to hope that if it reads all moral philosophy, it comes up with something reasonable and not stick everyone in?
Well, sure, we can try to teach it. But I mean, this is a bit like sort of a regular philosopher walking into a room of 4-year-olds and having the 4-year-olds teach them about moral philosophy. There might be certain benefits, but highly unpredictable what the results of this process will be. The superintelligence might just say, oh, those primitive humans, here's the flaw in this approach and that approach, and just go in its own direction. I agree. I mean, that's probably the best strategy if we're going to go down this road, but highly fallible, I would say.
So I was just wondering, I remember earlier in the talk you were mentioning the potential for like too much efficiency to strip away at the core, value system or the philosophical. But like, what if you had kind of a more, I guess, for lack of a better word, resourceful approach? Like, whatever, sometimes the efficiency isn't like categorically a good thing, right? Like, if you have let's say, I heard a pretty interesting argument that like if you have a government body, right, making it too efficient means there's no like robustness or redundancy that builds in kind of a stability in case something goes wrong.
Yeah, okay.
So I guess there are like things like that where sometimes maybe the best route is just like take 10 hours and think through everything in like one sitting, even though that seems inefficient, but then you have all the answers, right?
Yeah. So I think this is a really good point. So this might work. I want to talk about some potential limitations here, though. I mean, often this kind of make sure you take your time, think through it, don't make a mistake here, is all in the service of an ultimate goal. So when you're trying to achieve instrumental goals along the way, often this sort of approach can be guided by the final goal, because the final goal is some big picture thing. And then you've got these smaller goals along the way, and you're thinking, okay, like, I don't want to overachieve this, put overly intense effort into achieving this particular small goal at the expense of this other small goal, which is also in service to the big goal. So as long as we're talking about small goals serving big goals, this sort of process can be very effective. The trouble is, according to the orthogonality thesis, the big goal is not subject to any sort of counter pressure. Or if there's a system of big goals, the sort of harmonious achievement of those big goals is not accountable to anything else. And so it's that not accountability to anything else that I think causes the potential issue. Yeah. Sure.
what if, like, you could say a lot of, I guess there's always the tension, I guess, in AI alignment between, like, the, like, boots on the ground kind of approach where you're looking at specific algorithms and creating a set of rules, like a kind of a lower level but like more precise approach versus like there are some certain people who are thinking, okay, what philosophical framework do you need as the general guiding goal for like all AIs, regardless of niche, because everything ultimately harkens back or converges on that single goal. Like, what if it's just about solving actually solving the normative issue first in a very concrete way? So that's the goal is actually good enough to not to have some pressure on the scan.
Yeah, okay. So that sounds like it might be sort of one of these indirect moral approaches. And that is a way that you can go. There are dangers, though. So if the side decides, oh, you know, the right thing to do is eliminate all the humans, okay, it'll eliminate all the humans. If it decides the right thing to do is to sort of gauge the sophistication of cognitive apparatus or experience or something like that, and privilege the more sophisticated, and it thinks of itself as having more sophisticated, but actually it's just simulating that. There's nothing on at home. There's no consciousness, no thought. It may wind up doing something that's really distorted based on its reasoning. But yes, I agree. That is another plausible way that you could go.
Which assumption in your argument do you think doesn't apply to humans? Why didn't you think this whole argument applies to humans?
Applies to humans. Yeah, it's a good question. So
shouldn't we have already gotten rid of moral philosophy by this argument? We already decided it was bad and tried to kill it.
Yeah, okay. That's a good question. So which would I deny for humans? Yeah. So personally, yeah, I'm not that sympathetic to your orthogonality thesis. So that would be one, but I'm wondering if there's, for those who are, I'm wondering if there's another one that's also for humans.
Why believe orthogonality will be about SAI if we don't believe it about humans?
About humans. Well, yeah, okay, fair enough. But lots of people do believe it about humans and size. Let me just see here. It's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, maybe we can talk more about this. I mean, my instinct is the orthogonality thesis for humans too, but there may be something else. Let me look a little more carefully. You're getting me thinking about this.
Okay, thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Speaker.
All right.
Joe, that was awesome.
Okay, everyone.